Well, HR 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill, has officially been signed into law. And with it, it's bringing substantial changes to the residential and commercial solar incentive market from the federal government. There are going to be a ton of changes here, and we're going to go through what the finalized version of those are in this video. I've previously walked through what some of the impact may be. We did some interviews. I'll link those videos above if you'd like to go watch them. But this is the official changes and what this is going to mean for solar going forward. Let's start with Section 25D. That's the residential tax credit for owned systems. So for any homeowner who bought their solar via cash or via a loan. Now, the new text in HR 1 sets this credit to expire for any expenditures made after December 31st, 2025. This is a big change from what it used to be. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, this credit was set at 30% through 2032, at which point it started to step down with reduced rates until 2034, at the end of which that credit would no longer be available. This new bill sets a steep and sharp shutdown of this credit, with it ending at the very end of this year. Now, there are, at the time of this recording, apparently no changes to the rollover rule. So if you are a homeowner who does get your solar installed here in 2025 and you can't use all of that tax credit in this 2025 taxable year, there don't look to be any changes right now to the credit rolling over. So if you don't use all of it, you could still potentially use that in future years. Another big section of the tax credit here is Section 48E, which is used by TPOs, third-party ownership like leases and PPAs, and also commercial solar installations. This one got a little bit more of a win in the final version of the bill because there were some proposed changes which were going to end this incredibly quickly. Under the official version, any system that is placed into service before December 31st, 2027 is going to be eligible for the credit, which means that leases, PPAs, and commercial systems can still take this for a few years. Now, there are some additional restrictions that we'll talk about in a little bit, but one of the exemptions to this is if the project actually begins construction before July 4th, 2026, which would be 1 year from enactment. Anything that begins construction before that doesn't actually have to be placed into service until the 2030, so the end of 2029. So you could still potentially get that credit if the system begins construction. And that's going to be more for the commercial systems that can take a long time to permit or to build because of a bunch of varying factors. But as far as leases and PPAs go, this does seem like a pretty big win on paper. However, there are some restrictions, and of course, that executive order that I mentioned earlier is directing the Secretary of the Treasury to cut down on some of the ways that people may work this around. So there may be changes coming that they cut out the credit potentially if you don't meet certain requirements, placed in service, construction date. For example, one of the things that's most common is that in order to claim credits for companies, they would say that either substantial work has to be started or at least 5% of the total cost expenditure be spent, which for a lot of times meant that companies could buy some of the equipment and then claim it right away. If the Secretary of the Treasury under this executive order does decide to crack down on that, they could raise that amount. So you have to spend more money or even change it entirely so that substantial construction has to begin before that credit can be claimed. So there may be changes coming to that, but at least for the time being, solar leases and PPAs can still claim credit for at least a time being. This brings us to the largest restriction that is on Section 48E tax credits, and that is foreign entities of concern, or FEOC. Under the writing of this bill, for any project that begins construction in 2026, 40% of all the value of the manufactured equipment, so all the equipment that goes in the installation, cannot come from a FEOC company. That is going to increase by 5% per year, topping out at 60% requirement for any project that's beginning construction after 2030. Now, what is FEOC? Well, FEOC, or a foreign entity of concern, is a designation given to an entity like a company if the U.S. government finds that that company is controlled or influenced in some fashion by a foreign entity from a covered nation. Covered nation right now includes China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. So the U.S. government, Department of Energy, will look at different companies and based on a few criteria determine whether or not they are FEOCs. So they look at where the company is headquartered in. If it's headquartered, incorporated, manufactures in, or performs relevant activities, according to the DOE website, in one of these covered nations. They're also going to look at any of the voting rights and the control. So if 25% of the board seats, 25% of the voting rights are controlled by a foreign government in one of the covered nations, or by a government official for one of those nations, that can qualify. And additionally, the Secretary of Energy will look at the company and determine whether or not that company performs any actions which are harmful toward national security. FEOC restrictions actually go and look at the entire supply chain. So it's not just top level company activities. They're going to look at where people are mining equipment from, where they're getting their materials, where anything is happening. But relevant activities can mean a lot of different things. You could look at patents, you could look at R&D. It leaves a pretty broad section for that to look at for what would be considered a relevant activity. And this can have pretty huge restrictions because a lot of solar equipment is tied towards companies in China. Additionally, even the Department of Energy's website does talk about U.S. subsidiaries of companies that may be their parent company, a FEOC in a covered nation. So the Department of Energy website actually does list an example where they say that a U.S. subsidiary, so U.S. that's based here in the United States, if their parent company performs these relevant activities, that company in the U.S. could be considered a FEOC and then still be subject to these restrictions for those 48E tax credits. So this is going to push a huge rush towards anything that is not tied to one of those nations, which could be a good thing as well. But some of these maybe smaller U.S. manufacturers or manufacturers that aren't ready for that demand are going to start to see a ton of huge demand coming towards their way. So there's going to be a real trick to kind of try to keep up with that demand and keep the supply active. Energy storage is also going to be subject to FEOC in the Section 48E for the tax credit. For them, it's 55% for any project beginning construction in 2026 and up to 75% by 2030. So what does all this mean for solar? Well, you see a lot of people that are talking and you may see thumbnails of their videos saying solar's dead, it's completely gone. And that just couldn't be further from the truth. Solar will still exist because it is a cheaper form of energy, easier to deploy, and has a lot more direct benefit for homes that install it than if it would be any other form of energy that's installed on a full grid capacity. So solar still absolutely has a place in the energy mix and will still be utilized. Losing any of these incentives just means that it is less affordable for the average homeowner. So while this may push a little bit more towards wealthier homeowners who can afford to take that, there are also going to be huge changes and opportunities in the market to open this more up. We're seeing some trouble with some TPO companies and with even some lenders. So you may see solar financing move to a little bit more of a local, like credit unions, for example, that can offer great financing rates to a lot of homeowners who may otherwise not be able to afford solar, may be able to do it. There's also creative financing like PACE financing that you could see expand into other areas as well, so it ties it to your property taxes instead. Overall, there's a ton of opportunity with this changing, and this is one of the biggest changes that the solar industry has seen in a very long time. Solar's not going anywhere. The market's going to take a dip. Year over year growth is going to be smaller, but the companies that lean more heavily into the value behind solar and also diversifying their business by adding HVAC, electrical, EV charging, other services like that are going to be the ones that are poised for success. When you focus on true value and offer a diverse option for your customers, you are giving yourself the best chance to continue to be successful through this and finding the right messaging that works best to convey value. That's the important part here. It has to be based on the value. You're not going to be able to rely on the old tricks of just a low monthly payment. So this is really going to make sure that customers know what they're getting and know the value behind that. Solar is not going anywhere, and Solar Insure is here to help. If you're a solar installer that's watching this and you think, how am I going to get through this and how am I going to weather these changes? Reach out to us. We are happy to talk about our product and even your company as a whole to see what ways can you be successful in this. There's a lot of changes happening. Of course, there will probably be more. So make sure if you're not already, subscribe to the channel so you can keep up to date with anything going on in the solar industry. We will talk about all these changes and how you as a business can be successful and how you as a homeowner can still get that value out of your solar installation. Thanks for watching so much, and we'll catch you in the next video.